This is an ODB Films production. Visit odbfilms.com today.
In Latin, renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This is the show where we explore the miraculous nature of the mundane as we look at one part of the Catholic tradition to help you engage more fully in the practice of faith. Past episodes are available at renovopodcast.com and odbfilms.com/podcast. I'm Doug Tuke, and today we look at the California missions. This is so cool. For me, I was baptized in Mission San Luis Rey because my mom is a California girl, and it was the opportunity was there, and we took it. And I remember revisiting Mission San Luis Rey in the 80s when I was visiting family a long time ago. And then when I got married, it was hilarious trying to navigate the tribunal at the mission to get my baptismal certificate. So much fun. Anyway, I've always been kind of obsessed with the missions, what they are, just what they represent in the United States of America in terms of the church. So I thought, what a cool way to do a show. What a cool way to just dig into this kind of Americana Catholic culture and talk a little bit about the controversies that come from that, because nothing is without controversy in the church. So if you've never heard of or seen the California missions, any of them, this is going to be a great show. You're going to totally get into it. If you visited or just you kind of know the history of the rancheros and just what became of evangelization of the California coast, this might be something that you didn't know before. So I'm kind of excited to share that with you. So here's what we know. Basically, in the late 18th century, the California missions began, and it was an effort really to convert Native Americans to Catholicism. Not going to sugarcoat that at all. Expand European territory, blah, 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 right? There were 21 missions in all, and they lasted from about 1769 until 1833. Now, the California missions began in the late 18th century, specifically for this evangelization, like we talked about. But Spain was really responsible for the missions specifically, which scholars believe were attempts to pretty much colonize the Pacific coast of North America. Now, there were 21 total, right? Like we talked about. And the system brought a lot of new cultural and religious ideas to California. And that's a big deal because California is monstrous. Now, critics would charge this systematic oppression of the Native Americans basically amounted to slavery. And there are elements of that in the development of the missions. So just be aware. Spain claimed California as its territory in 1542. Spaniards didn't really try to occupy the land till like the late 1700s. And then around the time of the first mission, Spain had a considerable presence in Mexico. So in 1769, the Spanish king ordered land and sea expeditions to depart from Mexico to California. He also sent military troops and Franciscan missionaries to this new land. And of some of those, of them, was Junipero Serra. And this is a saint that comes with some controversy. So let's dig into who Father Junipero was. He's known as the father of California's Spanish missions. He personally founded 9 of the 21 Spanish missions. That's amazing. And then he served as president of the California missions from 1767 until he dies in 1784. Now, he was born Miguel Jose Serra back in 1713, November 24th to be exact, at Petra on the island of Mallorca in Spain. And when he was 16, he entered the Franciscan order, a group of priests, who follow the teachings of St. Francis of Assisi specifically. And when he joined that order, he changed his name to Junipero. Serra was an intellectual guy, and he was considered to be brilliant, like intellectually brilliant. He became a professor of theology, and it seemed like he would spend his life teaching and learning, but that pretty much changed in 1750. So he goes to the New World. In 1750, Father Serra was considered old at the age of 37. Good God, I'm 42. Old at 37? Come on now. And at that time, the average life expectancy was about 35 years. So he was a small, frail man who was also in ill health. And in spite of that, he volunteers to become a Franciscan missionary to the New World. So Serra was a little sick when he first arrived in Veracruz, Mexico, but he insisted on walking from there all the way to Mexico City, 200 miles away. Holy cow. So along the way, a mosquito bit him and the bite became infected. And then this injury, it basically bothered him for the rest of his life. It was just amazing. Father Serra worked in the Sierra Gorda area north of north central Mexico for the next 17 years. In 1787, the Franciscans took over the California missions from the Jesuits specifically. And Father Serra was basically put in charge. That's kind of amazing. So at the age of 56, well beyond his old age of 37, Father Serra went to California for the first time with an explorer, Gaspar de Portola, and they went basically for political and religious reasons. So the Catholic Church wanted to convert the Native Americans, into devoted Christians, the country of Spain wanted control of California, period, and the ocean trade routes off its shores because the Russians pushed into it from the north. There's some history that a lot of people have not spent a lot of time reading. So Father traveled with the soldiers, and then he established missions in the new territory. And on the way to California, Serra's leg was so sore that he could barely walk, and he refused to go back to Mexico. So he's quoted as saying, quote, "Even though I should die on the way, I shall not turn back." Just super dedicated to this mission. So Serra and Portola, they arrive in what's now San Diego on July 1st, 1769. And they started out with about 300 people, but only half of them remained. Amazing how difficult that travel was back then. So Serra becomes the father of these missions, right? He spends the rest of his life as head of the missions in California, founding 9 missions in all, including Mission San Carlos de Borromeo, Charles Borromeo, patron of youth, patron of education, in Carmel, where he had his headquarters. So among other accomplishments, Father Serra introduced agriculture and irrigation systems, and he converted the natives to Christianity. Unfortunately, not all the results of Spanish settlement was good. The Spanish priests and soldiers carried a lot of European diseases that the natives had no immunity to. And this is really the story of Native American enculturation across the U.S. When the Indians, Native American community, caught those diseases, they often died. And because of that, California's Indian population declined from about 300,000 in 1769 to about 200,000 in 1821. That is startling. So Father Serra was a pretty small guy. He was a hard worker, like we talked about, despite physical ailments, which he had asthma, the soreness in his leg that never really healed, so always walked with a limp. He suffered bouts of scurvy, lack of vitamin C, and yet he walked and he rode a horse for hundreds of miles through the rough and dangerous terrain pretty regularly. As if this wasn't enough, Father Serra was known for actions kind of intended to deny his bodily passions and appetites. So sometimes he would cause himself pain. He wore heavy shirts with sharp wires pointing inward. He whipped himself until he bled sometimes. He used a burning candle to scar his chest. In spite of all this, he traveled more than 24,000 miles in his lifetime. That's amazing. Father Serra died in 1784 at the age of 70 at Mission San Carlos de Borromeo, and he was buried under the sanctuary floor. Now, he becomes a saint. In 1987, Pope John Paul II beatified Father Serra, which is a step away from sainthood. And then in 2015, Pope Francis made him a saint during his visit to the United States. Now, he canonized Serra, making him an official saint, and it was pretty controversial. It was an act that a lot of people applauded and a lot of them condemned. If you want to get perspective on both sides of that, including insights from a descendant of Native Americans who worked to get sainthood for Serra, there's a really good article on CNN's website. I don't care if you don't like CNN. You should really check this out because it's super well done. Google it. Check it out. Okay, that's Father Serra. Comes with a little bit of controversy, but he's really the founder. But let's get into the goals in the missions, what they are, why they are what they are when we get back from this word from our sponsor, which might be me. ODB Films brings you a brand new podcast called 2 Minute Takes, where we discuss great Catholic teaching in film. That's right. It is only 2 minutes long. Everybody's got time for that. Check out brand new episodes on iTunes or at odbfilms.com/podcast today. Hey, welcome back. I do hope you check out 2 Minute Takes. I am super excited about that new podcast. It's going to be amazing. Tons of episodes already out there, but we are just railing them out. 2 minutes. You got time for that. Trust me. Okay. So the goals of the missions specifically. Now, the main goal of the California missions was to convert Native Americans. We talked about that. Devoted Christians, Spanish citizens, political and religious. Okay. Spain used mission work basically to influence the natives with specific cultural and religious instruction. Now, another motivation for the missions was to really ensure that rival countries such as Russia and Great Britain didn't try to occupy the California region first. So there was really a sense of like establishment of their presence. Now, 21 in all, okay? 21 in all. San Diego, San Carlos, San Antonio, San Gabriel, San Luis, San Francisco, San Juan, Santa Clara, San Buenaventura, Santa Barbara, La Purísima Concepción, Santa Cruz, Nuestra Señora de la Soledad, San Jose, San Juan Bautista, San Miguel Archangel, San Michael the Archangel, San Fernando Rey España, San Luis Rey, Santa Inés, San Rafael, and San Francisco Solano. That's the 21. And that's in order from 1769 to 1823. Okay. Establish a presence as the Spanish government, right? But the missions also created new communities where these natives received religious education and instruction. And the Spanish established pueblos or towns and presidios or forts for protection. And that was a big deal. The natives lived in the missions until the religious training was basically complete. And then they would move to homes outside of the missions. Now, once the natives converted to Christianity, the missionaries would move on to new locations, and then the existing missions served as churches, really parishes, basically. The native converts were known as neophytes. That's also that's a word that we use all the time in the church, those that are in preparation for confirmation and so on and so forth. After they were baptized, they were expected to perform labor. Typically, men worked in the fields and women cooked. Both learned Spanish and attended church. Farming was really important in the mission community. Wheat, barley, and maize were some of the staple crops that were grown. But the Spanish missionaries also brought fruits from Europe, such as apples, peaches, and pears. That stimulation of the economy still is functional from California today. That's amazing. Other jobs included carpentry, lots of building, weaving, leather working. Padres or the religious leaders oversaw the mission. They were assigned 6 soldiers to protect them and the mission properties. That was kind of the lay of the land at the time. The mission, the period heavily influenced architecture in California also. Architecture all over the place, really. And a lot of the buildings, houses, and the churches all still exist today. Like I said, if you're going to do a road trip up and down the California coast, this is an amazing way to spend your time, is to just see these staples of really church history. So Native Americans used all natural materials such as stone, timber, mud, brick, adobe, and then tile to build the structures. Typically, these buildings, though, had really big courtyards with tall adobe walls, like the rancheros of the time, the gigantic ranches, these Mexican-American ranches of the time. Missions were built around these patios that contain fountains and a garden. The buildings of this period are sometimes labeled as mission style to describe that design and craftsmanship. They were designed to gather well. I love that, just to gather well. The mission system basically came to an end by about 1821. Mexico won its independence from Spain, and for several years, there was a real debate about what to do with this mission system because it was making money. I mean, they were farming, they were expanding. But in 1833, the Mexican government passed a law that secularized and ended the mission. So California was a part of Mexico during this time. Some of the mission land and the buildings were turned over to the Mexican government, while a lot of the property was intended to be given back to the natives. Private owners ended up with the majority of the land. And later, missions were used as U.S. military bases in the 1846 war with Mexico. Amazing, right? Now, after gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in 1848, Americans began to migrate by the masses to California, right? 49ers. And in 1850, California officially became a state. So the system, this expansion, ownership by the Spanish to really reach the Native Americans, convert them, basically just declare they're the landowners. It all kind of died. Abraham Lincoln granted the Catholic Church ownership of some of the California missions in 1865. And today, a lot of the missions are tourist attractions with their own museums and not are all functioning as parishes, although Mission San Luis Rey still is. Okay, let's talk about the bigger picture here. What's the big picture of the impact of this? They stretch from San Diego to Sonoma. I mean, that's a huge deal. So huge, significant impact on the native Californians. The mission era really influenced all kinds of things, culture, obviously religion, architecture, art, language, economy in the region. I mean, the Spanish language was essentially brought to that part of the United States, but the missions also impacted the Indian culture in a really negative way, obviously. So Europeans, they forced the natives to change their civilization to match the modern world. In the process, local traditions, cultures, customs were lost. Language was lost. Some critics have really kind of charged that the Spanish mission system forced Native Americans into slavery and prostitution, comparing the missions to concentration camps. That's not fair in terms of, if any stalwart historian of Native American culture in the United States, they would not make that assumption. That's not just my political agenda coming through. That's not accurate history. We might retaliate that way in a modern era. That's not true. We talked about how the Spanish missionaries brought diseases with them that killed untold thousands of natives. Prior to California missions, there were about 300,000 native Californians. By 1834, Scholars believe that dropped way down, like we talked about before. So it's a case of evangelization and culture, and it's also a case of oppression. And I'll tell you what, there's very few places in the quote unquote new world where you don't find these recipes. And I think it's fair, listeners, I think it's fair that we could get stuck there and we could kind of wallow in that, but it's not fair to stay there. It's not, because that's denying the beauty of the sacraments. It's denying the long-term livelihood and the culture that emerged from the graces and the benefits of the good work of Father Junipero, even though he sometimes gets criticized in the modern era for being the ringleader of oppression. And you'll notice in the canonization process, his canonization process, there was a tremendous advocacy by local Native communities for his canonization. There's a modern sense in many parts of where the missions are today that they are thankful that there is a tremendous amount of appreciation for the fact that the spirituality, the grace of the faith, the Catholic faith, has been brought to these folks, that it was brought here. We have a similar story here in Montana. I mean, I've worked a lot with the Salish Kootenai, with the Blackfeet, and I will, under no circumstances, sugarcoat the fact that the mission schools and some of the nastiness that came and countered a lot of culture, it did exist the same way it did in the California missions. But it would be naive to just damn the whole process, to say, no, the sacraments have no place here. We should never share the faith. It should never happen at any expense. We should never collide culture. That just simply isn't true. At the heart of cultural preservation, there is also a sense of evangelization. And I would argue that your culture should always be an expression of your faith and not necessarily the other way around. And when the two can come together with harmony, with successful harmony, which in many places they have in the Native community, quite frankly, the Native community has a lot to teach us about the Holy Spirit that we don't necessarily understand in our Anglo ways. I think it's beautiful. And I think that's the case here. I think there's a lot of controversy. I have no doubt that there was oppression. I have no doubt that there was a tone of enslavement in many of the efforts to build structures and farms and then, of course, move on to the next one and hope that there's financial and political stability behind. I have no doubt that grossness happened, the nastiness, the humanity of that happened, but it's not fair to damn the system. These are still pilgrimage symbols of the church in the New World, and that there is beauty there. And I'm thankful for it. I was baptized there. I'm thankful for the bringing of the Catholic faith to the California. So that's the missions. Check them out. Put them on your to-do list of road trips in the future, and I hope that you'll enjoy each and every one of them. Don't forget to visit renovopodcast.com for past episodes. You can also visit odbfilms.com/podcast. Please subscribe to, review, and rate our podcast. We always appreciate your input. Your topic suggestions, questions, and or comments are always welcome at doug@renovopodcast.com. Learn more about me at odbfilms.com, on Twitter and Instagram at DTOOKE and the number 1. Friends, always remember to engage the tradition and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.